Hey everyone, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. So Pope Leo just had a interreligious event with not only a number of Christian groups, but also non-Christian representatives who are present. This was an interreligious event in Lebanon, and I want to take a look at the Pope's message that he has on the Vatican website that he delivered at the interreligious event and take a look at maybe some of the things that he's saying about some of the other religions, including Islam and the Islamic call to prayer. And then maybe I want to take a look at some previous statements from popes in the early second millennium that may be contrasted with what Pope Leo is saying. And I think that that will kind of show how far um, the Vatican has kind of moved away from some of the older positions on other religions, including Islam. So I want to take a look at that. And very briefly, however, I do want to mention on his return flight from Lebanon, the Pope just gave an update on the situation with the German bishops. We've been talking about the German synodal way and the German bishops for years now. Very controversial for some of the reforms and doctrines that they're pushing for. They've been teaching that, for example, homosexuality is not a sin, it's normal, a normal human condition, and to act on it is within the will of God. And they've been pushing for things like women's ordination, all sorts of things that are just incompatible with Catholic doctrine. They've been doing so with impunity. The Vatican has been in dialogue with them for a number of years on these controversial aspects of the German synodal way, and to really little benefit. It's done very little to actually rein in the German bishops, it would appear. And we even saw after Pope Francis passed away, they pushed through even further radical reforms in that interregnum period, kind of taking advantage of the time period where there's no pope. Um, and so we've been seeing some really concerning maneuvering from the German bishops and maybe a poor ability on part of Rome to rein them in. Well, Pope Leo was asked about the German bishops on his return flight, and here's what he says. He says a process is underway to try to ensure that the German synodal path does not stray, so to speak, from what must be considered the path of the universal church. And then he added that he hopes that things will be resolved positively. So we don't know what kind of measures he's referring to. It doesn't sound like these are going to be mass excommunications or mass retirements, since I don't know if that would be labeled a positive resolution. I think that that would be a little different than what he might have envisioned here. It sounds like this is going to be a little bit more of the same, the dialogue, accompany the German bishops, try to find some kind of common ground kind of thing. So far, that hasn't worked. Maybe, however, he has a different plan. Maybe he has, some kind of plan in mind that will work. We'll see. We'll find out. Of course, a person can be hopeful, but certainly something really needs to be done about the German bishops, because it's very clear that they're teaching things that are heretical. I mean, and I'm not being rhetorical here. I'm talking about things that are contrary to dogma. And that's, of course, not fitting for a bishop, let alone an entire Episcopal conference to do. And yeah, that causes some issues because, the Pope might have to excommunicate an entire Episcopal conference and replace them all, which would be pretty difficult. But I think, like I said, for years now, it seems like it's already come to that point. I don't know what kind of benefit dialogue and stuff like that will really contribute to at this point. I think, we're way past that, but maybe I'm wrong. And maybe, again, Pope Leo has something else in mind. So I guess we'll find out more soon, but he is hopeful that something's going to happen to help them not stray. We'll see. I'll let you know as soon as we find out more details on that, but I wanted to sneak that in just because I did find that to be an interesting update. By the way, I want to remind everybody, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. If you appreciate the content of this channel, I certainly would appreciate your support. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, so let's take a look at the speech from Pope Leo on the question of this interreligious dialogue. And he's focusing especially on the dialogue between Christianity and Islam, because it's taking place in Lebanon, where you have representation from both, right? So that's kind of the backdrop here. So, apostolic journey of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV to Turkey and Lebanon. Here is the address of the Holy Father on December 1st in Beirut. And by the way, this is on video. I'm just not going to play it for copyright purposes, but I did watch the video. Here's what it says. Dear brothers and sisters, I'm deeply moved and immensely grateful to stand among you today in this blessed land, a land exalted by the prophets of the Old Testament, who beheld in its towering cedars emblems of the righteous soul that flourishes beneath heaven's vigilant gaze, a land where the echo of the Logos has never fallen silent, but continues to call forth from century to century those who desire to open their hearts to the living God. In his post-synodal apostolic exhortation, Pope Benedict XVI emphasized that the Church's universal nature and vocation require that she engage in dialogue with the members of other religions. So dialogue here is not considered optional. It's not something even accidental. It's considered part of the vocation of the Church. In the Middle East, this dialogue is based on the spiritual and historical bonds uniting Christians to Jews and Muslims. It is a dialogue which is not primarily dictated by pragmatic, political, and social considerations, but underlying theological concerns which have to do with faith. So notice that. He's saying, look, ultimately the purpose of the dialogue, with Christianity and other religions, Jews, Muslims, whatever, is not necessarily some kind of pragmatic political social thing, but rather it's a dialogue to get to the underlying theological concerns that have to do with faith. And the reason why is because there are some fundamental differences between all the world religions. Anybody who's telling you that you can just hold to this syncretistic view that blends them all together, synthesizes them all together, everybody's kind of saying the same thing, just in different ways, that's not entirely accurate, right? There's a little bit of overlap here and there, depending on just what we're talking about. But in many cases, there are some fundamental differences. So it's not the case that, it's all just a whole bunch of different ways of saying the same thing. Dear friends, your presence here today in this remarkable place where minarets and church bell towers stand side by side. Minarets are those large pillars on the side of mosques. So he's saying you got these church bell towers, you got these large minarets in Lebanon standing side by side, yet both reach skyward, testifies to the enduring faith of this land and the steadfast devotion of its people to the one God. So he's saying, these mosques and these churches, they're all pointing upwards because they're pointing up to the one true God, and they're a testament to faith in the land of Lebanon. And of course, you'll recall, Pope Leo has said many times, Christians, Muslims worship the same God. All of the popes in the post-conciliar period have said that. Benedict, John Paul II, Paul VI, Pope Francis, and including the Second Vatican Council, right, explicitly says that. And it's not unique to Vatican II or the post-conciliar period. You find that actually in the medieval popes themselves, who will say that. For example, we do find that in letters of popes to Muslim leaders in the 11th century. So it's not like a new modernist kind of thing. It's something that has deep roots. Here is the beloved land. May every bell toll, every adhan, every call to prayer blend into a single soaring hymn. The adhan is the Islamic call to prayer. If you've ever been to the Middle East or just to a Muslim country before the 5 daily prayers, there's usually a call to prayer that goes out publicly. That's what he's referring to. So he's saying the church bells, when they telling you to come to mass, as well as the Islamic call to prayer in these lands, blend into a single soaring hymn, a hymn to God that glorifies God. So he's speaking very highly of not just church bells, but also of the Islamic call to prayer. And he says that they are soaring him not only to glorify the merciful creator of heaven and earth, but also to lift a heartfelt prayer for the divine gift of peace. And so he sees it very positively, right? There's some people who they hear the call to prayer and they're very offended, they're very upset by it. For Pope Leo, he thinks it's a beautiful thing that glorifies God in the same way that church bells, when they go off before Mass, glorifies God. And so he's speaking very, very positively of it. Which I was told, by the way, that he's not the first. In fact, somebody told me in the comment section that Cardinal Sarah spoke very, very well of the Islamic call to prayer and how it inspired him in his youth. I'd love to get some verification on that, but I've had that told to me by multiple sources. And there's some are saying Saint Francis of Assisi did the same, and so he might not be alone here. He might not be unique. It seems like maybe there's some others who have echoed the same sentiment. He continues, for many years, and especially in recent times, the eyes of the world have been fixed on the Middle East, the cradle of the Abrahamic religions. And so the Abrahamic religions, this is a theme that you'll find, for example, in the Second Vatican Council. This is a reference to Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Three religions that trace their roots back to the patriarch Abraham in the book of Genesis. Observing the arduous journey and the unceasing quest for the precious gift of peace. So you can see that that's a big theme that he's highlighting here, not only with the church bells and the adhan and their call to prayer glorifying God, but also a prayer for peace. And that's going to be the thing that he's going to really harp on here. At times, humanity looks at the Middle East with a sense of trepidation and disheartenment in the face of such complex and long-standing conflicts. Yet in the midst of these struggles, a sense of hopefulness and encouragement can be found when we focus on what unites us: our common humanity, our belief in a God of love and mercy. So he's saying, okay, there might be some differences, but there is this path towards peace by focusing on the things that are shared in common: humanity, obviously, but also a shared love for the God of Abraham, the God of love and mercy. In an age when coexistence can seem like a distant dream, the people of Lebanon, while embracing different religions, stand as a powerful reminder that fear, distrust, and prejudice do not have the final word, and that unity, reconciliation, and peace are possible. So again, that's going to be the big theme that he is promoting here. And it's interesting, we're getting some feedback here in the comments. Let me just briefly engage it, and thank you for the comments. This person says, bruh, we don't worship the same God. As a Catholic, I completely disagree with that. Well, I mean, how do you explain, like I said, a whole ecumenical council explicitly saying that? How do you explain multiple popes saying that, not only in the post-conciliar period, but in the early second millennium in the 11th century? I mean, we've covered this numerous times, right? I mean, we can rehearse and go to the primary sources, but that's Catholic doctrine. So when you say you're a Catholic and you disagree with it, you're saying you're a Catholic who disagrees with Catholic doctrine. And you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of your Father James Martins of the world, who say that, hey, I'm Catholic, but I teach this about homosexuality. And then they go on to teach something that's contrary to what the church actually teaches on homosexuality. You can say you're Catholic, but do you actually hold to Catholic doctrine? I mean, with all due respect, I'm just asking questions. Okay. So it continues. It is a mission that remains unchanged throughout the history of this beloved land, to bear witness to the enduring truth that Christians, Muslims, Druze, because, and by the way, there is a Druze delegation there, and countless others can live together and build a country united by respect and dialogue. So he's saying, in the case of Lebanon, you have this kind of religious diversity, and Christians, Muslims, Druze are able to live in peace and harmony there, and that should be a beacon of hope for the rest of the world. 60 years ago, the Second Vatican Council, with the promulgation of the Declaration Nostra Aetate, opened a new horizon for encounter and mutual respect between Catholics and people of different religions, emphasizing that true dialogue and collaboration is rooted in love, the only foundation for peace, justice, and reconciliation. This dialogue, inspired by divine love, should embrace all people of goodwill, reject prejudice, discrimination, and persecution, and affirm the equal dignity of every human being. So that's a theme that we've seen very, very often, not only in this pontificate, but again, going back to the Second Vatican Council because of this particular document. And so it's been rehearsed numerous times by the post-conciliar popes. In fact, this was a theme that was just highlighted in that joint declaration that was signed by Pope Leo and Patriarch Bartholomew, the Eastern Orthodox Patriarch of Constantinople. The big thing was, there was that aspect of a recommitment for reunification, but the bigger picture was working towards equal dignity of every human being and peace. That was a big theme there as well. Of course, these things are going on at the same time, right? So I expect there to be some overlap in theme. Though the public ministry of Jesus unfolded chiefly in Galilee and Judea, the Gospels also recount episodes where he visited the region of Decapolis, most notably in the environs of Tyre and Sidon, where he encountered the Syro-Phoenician woman whose unwavering faith moved him to heal her daughter. Here, the land itself becomes more than a mere site of encounter between Jesus and a pleading mother. It becomes a place where humility, trust, and perseverance overcome all barriers and meet God's boundless love that embraces every human heart. Indeed, this is the very core of interreligious dialogue itself. The discovery of God's presence beyond all boundaries and the invitation to seek him together with reverence and humility. I pointed that out to somebody and they retorted that, well, isn't God present everywhere? What does he mean by God's presence in beyond all boundaries in the context of other religions? I think he's talking about saving grace, because I've shown the magisterium talks about the possibility of salvation and saving grace within these other communities with a lot of qualifications. This is still something that we've seen from the magisterium. In fact, I have a whole free PDF ebook on it over at rtcourses.com. Go and check it out. And it's a very explicitly what the magisterium says, right? So I suspect that's what he's referring to here. If Lebanon is renowned for its majestic cedars, the olive tree, too, stands as a cornerstone of its heritage. The olive tree not only adorns the space in which we gather today, but it's also revered in the sacred texts of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And notice he's you kind of expect him to talk about the sacred texts of Judaism to be sacred texts, right? Although that would include not just the Old Testament, but the Talmud, right? But you don't necessarily expect that with reference to Islam. But here he's using that term sacred text for not just Christianity and Judaism, Old Testament and New Testament, and maybe even the Talmud, but also for the Quran, serving as a timeless symbol of reconciliation and peace. Its long life and remarkable ability to flourish even in the hardest environments symbolize endurance and hope, reflecting the steadfast commitment required to nurture peaceful coexistence. So again, you continue to see the theme here of peace, saying that the sacred texts of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam teach peace. And also we're seeing peaceful coexistence in Lebanon is kind of the idea. From this tree flows oil that heals, a balm for physical and spiritual wounds, manifesting the boundless compassion of God for all who suffer. Its oil also provides light, serving as a reminder of the call to illuminate our hearts through faith, charity, and humility. As the roots of the cedars and olive trees delve deep and spread wide across the earth, so too the Lebanese people are scattered throughout the world, yet bound together by the enduring strength and timeless heritage of your homeland. Your presence here and across the globe enriches the world with your multi-millennial heritage, but it also represents a vocation. In an ever more interconnected world, you are called to be builders of peace, to confront intolerance, overcome violence, and banish exclusion, illuminating the path towards justice and concord for all through the witness of your faith, which is pretty remarkable because it's in stark contrast with a lot of other things that the church has said historically, right? I was just talking to my patrons about the Albigensian crusade, where the Pope and an ecumenical council are calling for the targeting of civilians, of non-combatants, in this case, heretics, right? Albigensian and Cathars. And that is so far removed from this message here of overcoming violence, confronting intolerance, banishing exclusion, right? That is just a very different message than what we've seen in previous centuries from various popes and councils. Dear brothers and sisters, on the 25th of March each year, celebrated as a national holiday in your country, you come together to venerate Mary, Our Lady of Lebanon, honored in her sanctuary, which is adorned with an impressive statue of the Virgin with outstretched arms, embracing all the Lebanese people. May this loving and maternal embrace of the Virgin Mary, Mother of Jesus and Queen of Peace, guide each of you, so that in your homeland across the Middle East and throughout the world, the gift of reconciliation and peaceful coexistence may flow forth from the live streams flowing from Lebanon. May they bring hope and unity to all. Shukran, which is Arabic for thank you. Okay, so it's a like I said, it's a very different message, right? And it's not unique to Pope Leo. It's a message that we've seen, especially since the time of the Second Vatican Council, but reiterated by numerous popes, culminating in obviously the most recent pope. But it is in stark contrast with some other approaches, statements, teachings that we've seen in the preconciliar period in reference to other religions. And there's maybe to some degree, and maybe fully, where they could be harmonized, but at least just like on the surface, they appear to be in tension. It appears to be a very different tone, right? And I want to maybe point to just one example here from Pope Pius II. Pope Pius II released a document. Gosh, I forget what year. Let's double check. Pope Pius. Let's see. He is. I forget offhand. So yeah, mid 15th century. So this is not too long ago, right? But here's a document from him, and notice the tone about, for example, Islam, and we can also point out to similar cases with Judaism, right? And when the church speaks of Judaism in the preconciliar period versus how it speaks of it from Vatican II onward. But in this case, since we're talking about the Adhan and Muslims and all that, here's a pope from the 1400s. Now listen to what he says. He says about Islam: then more than 800 years ago, there arose a false prophet, Muhammad, who blasphemed the Holy Trinity and turned not only his fellow tribesmen, but also the Egyptians and all of Syria away from the true and orthodox religion. A barbaric enemy has entered the workplace of our salvation, where our God shed his precious blood for our salvation. Dirty Saracen hands. Saracen is a reference for Muslims. So he's saying dirty Muslim hands have defiled and still defiled that purple and sweet smelling couch where he who is our life slept in the Lord. And they only show it to the Christians for money. Okay, so you can see that kind of rhetoric, that kind of language is certainly there in the past, but it appears to be a thing of the past. And it appears to be something that the church no longer holds to. You can contrast that kind of language again with the post-conciliar language that we've been seeing, whether it's the speech from Pope Leo today or just numerous others. I mean, there's many others from Pope Leo, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict, John Paul II, the Second Vatican Council itself. There are a lot of statements that the church has made about other religions, including Islam, and they appear to be in stark contrast with this, right? So it kind of goes to show you how much of a um, process of change the church has kind of undergone in some of these things, and not only just in this, but in many other things as well, in its disposition towards um, states, handling of affairs with states, in the question of the death penalty, in the question of targeting civilians or the use of torture, um, as we see with like authorized with the Inquisition, but now denounced by the Magisterium, the doctrine of discovery. Like we can go over a lot of instances where there appears to be a pretty big uh, contrast, right? And I think the watershed moment where you start to see most of this is the documents of the Second Vatican Council themselves, right? Signed not just by the Pope, but I mean, a good 2,500 bishops, so the bishops of the world. And, at Vatican II, that's where you have the most representation from the episcopate compared to all ecumenical councils. Like, I think of the Second Ecumenical Council, um, had a representation of only 150 bishops and only exclusively from the East, none from the West. Rome wasn't even represented. The West wasn't represented. So you could see, really small, tiny councils like that, and then compare them to something like Vatican II, where you got, several thousand bishops from all over the world, not just one particular region, and all overwhelmingly voting in favor of documents like Nostra Aetate and Lumen Gentium and others that speak very, very, very favorably of other religions. So Judaism, Islam, and to one degree or another, Buddhism, and also Hinduism, and also even positively of agnostics. There's that part of Lumen Gentium where it talks about how an agnostic could be saved and go to heaven. I think that's Lumen Gentium 16, if I recall correctly. Which might explain that phrase, or not phrase, but that event from Pope Francis. You remember that little boy who came to him and said his atheist father, he's really sad about his atheist father, and Pope Francis reassured him that his atheist father is in heaven, and everybody was like, "Wait, what?" I think that may have been what he was thinking, right? That mentality that there's hope for salvation even for people who are agnostic, and maybe that's what was going on there, right? So I think this is why we see such a change, right? A different dynamic is from the Second Vatican Council. You have a very different perspective promoted by the entire episcopate and the Pope, and not only that, but all of the popes subsequently and all of the bishops subsequently, right? It's not like it was just the popes. All the bishops are on board as well with these documents in the post-conciliar period. And if you look at the statements of the popes on other religions in the post-conciliar period, they're always referring back to the documents of Vatican II as the basis for what they're saying. And that takes place right here in the speech that we just read from Pope Leo. He's rooting it in what? Nostra Aetate. So whenever you see like 1986, Assisi, and all that going on with the Pope and other religions, what is he basing it on? He's constantly citing Vatican II, the Vatican II documents. So I think that's why we see kind of a contrast, is because the most recent ecumenical council was in some ways a watershed event that reformed a lot of these things. Okay, well, anyways, I wanted to bring this to your attention, and I do want to talk about a similar theme because I've seen it come up in the comment section from other people. Other people have commented on some of these videos and said something like "one world religion." They keep saying "one world religion," and of course, if you challenge them, where do you get that from? What Bible verse is that from? They don't know. They have no idea. Hint, there is no Bible verse that says one world religion, not a thing. Although I do think that they're getting it from some elements that you can find in the book of Revelation, and I want to discuss that in a future video, hopefully as early as tomorrow. So stay tuned. I want to talk about the concept of one world religion. What does the Bible teach on the matter? Does it teach anything on the matter? And what does the Catholic Church teach on the question? So look for that. If that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And let me see if there are any questions in the chat. If you have a question, just make sure to put it to Michael here at Reason and Theology. Happy to answer your questions. And let's see. Okay. So somebody says, seems like a contradiction if Rome can change its views about Islam and say they have been wrong since the 7th century. Could they be wrong about papal supremacy and filioque? Yeah. Hey, great question. The common response is going to be, well, the papacy and filioque, those are definitively taught and have therefore become ineligible for reversals. Whereas I suspect most people would argue those statements from previous popes were non-definitive in nature and thus can be reversed by virtue of the fact that they're non-definitive, i.e. non-infallible. So they would probably point to that distinction, I would suspect, if you were to just, ask the average person, but it kind of raises the question, what can and can't be reversed? And so incidentally, I do have a lecture that I'm delivering on that very topic this Saturday. So go to rtcourses.com and check it out. Can Catholic doctrine change? Exploring the possibility of doctrinal reversals according to what the church itself teaches. So go ahead and reserve your spot. And by the way, when you do that, you'll get 40% off my magisterial studies bundle. All 30 lectures that I teach at the university level on the question of the Catholic magisterium, all the ecumenical councils, what the magisterium is, how to read magisterial documents. So take advantage of that significant discount. You might want to check that out because it kind of introduces the question of a reversal. So yeah, great question. Okay. What else do we have? Somebody says, have to disagree on this same God issue. It presents a serious difficulty if you attempt to disagree with it, because you're in a disagreement not only with multiple popes in the pre-conciliar period from the 11th century onward, but you're in disagreement with an ecumenical council, and you're in disagreement with numerous papal documents in the post-conciliar period. It would be like saying I disagree with Humane Vitae or something like that, which some liberals, or a lot of liberals do, right? Especially the German bishops, right? Speaking of the German bishops earlier, they attempt to do the same thing, right? They attempt to argue, well, those things are not definitively taught, and even though they're taught very frequently, I could still disagree with non-definitive teachings in certain exceptional cases, pro dono veritatis, and so they have their ways of trying to do that, right? And then you have to argue with them, is it definitive or not? But the same thing could be done exactly here, right? So if you're saying I'm Catholic, but I'm disagreeing with that, okay, just keep in mind that that's exactly what the liberals do. It's 100% what the liberals do as well. So you really lose a lot of footing to then critique liberals in their dissent from magisterial documents. So if you're engaging in dissent yourself, which there's a distinction between withholding assent and dissent. I don't know if you're making that distinction, but if you're talking about you're dissenting from these documents, it's going to be very hard for you to critique liberals when they dissent, is my point. But thank you for that. I appreciate it. Father Seraphim Rose said some good stuff in Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. With all due respect, I'd probably disagree with some of that, and you want to know my thoughts about Eastern Orthodoxy. Former Eastern Orthodox myself, I wrote a whole book on it, Answering Orthodoxy. Maybe check that out. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. I only see the same God thing pushed in later councils from the 60s. Well, I've corrected that 4 times already on this stream. Maybe you just now joined in, but again, that has been taught by popes in the 11th century, for example. So it's not just from the 60s. But even if it was, that doesn't get you out of the conundrum. It really doesn't. It's still taught by an ecumenical council of many popes from the 60s. That still doesn't get you out of the situation with you're in dissent. That it doesn't. You're still in that problem. But even then, you're still factually wrong. I highly doubt that the early church in the first 1,000 years would immediately disagree with you in the modern Church of Rome. Well, again, I've already corrected you on that, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you for having the debates of the Holy Trinity. Yeah, thank you. Glad to do it. Okay, any other questions that you'll had about this topic? I will be, like I said, doing another stream here on the question of one world religion, because it seems to be a theme that a lot of people are talking about in the comment section. So it's evidently a hot topic. So maybe we need to talk about it, because I suspect just the vast majority of people throwing out that phrase don't know what it's referring to. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know the basis for the claim. They're probably just kind of parroting what they hear other people say. And maybe we need to take a closer look at it. All right, so that's going to do it for it. I don't see any other questions, so I'll leave it at that. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. Appreciate all of your support. Thank you, all the viewers who are watching the show every day consistently. I appreciate you so much. And thank you to all the subscribers and patrons. And there maybe is a follow-up here. Okay, so when commenter says the Catholic Church says the Orthodox have salvation, so why need the Pope? The Pope and modern teachings aren't keeping them from salvation. Yeah, wonderful question. And a very good observation. You know, it's a topic I've talked about numerous times in my lectures, on videos here. So just to give you maybe a quick summary of it, yeah, it does talk about the possibility of salvation for not only Eastern Orthodox, but also people in other religions. But it's conditional, right? It's conditioned upon invincible ignorance, one cooperating with their conscience, one being infused with the theological virtues, specifically of faith. So there are some conditions to it, right? And some of them are mentioned by Vatican II itself, and some others are mentioned in some preconciliar documents, like the 1948 or 49 letter of the Holy Office to the St. Benedict Center and the Feniites. So some of the conditions are there. They're reasserted based on even other documents prior to that in Pius IX, for example. Well, so it's conditional, right? It's not just like a blanket affirmation. There are some conditions to it. How widespread is it? How likely is it? How possible? How frequent is it? Those things are kind of debated by a lot of people, but it does appear that it tends to be interpreted very broadly, like it's not very exceptional. It's happening very often, kind of thing. Why then do they need the Pope? So the idea that you'll find in the documents is that the church has the fullness of the faith. And so if you want the fullness of the gifts that God has given, you'll find that exclusively in the church, but you can find some of the other gifts elsewhere, insofar as those are participating in the one true church. Okay, so that's a quick answer. There's a lot to unpack there. And, I've done a lot of shows talking about it, but hopefully that will get you going and prime the pump. Thanks for the answers. I'm an honest inquirer stuck between Catholic and Orthodox still, unfortunately. Hey, thank you for the questions. It's a very astute observation. I think you'll find the answer to your search here in my book, Answering Orthodoxy, on the question between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. I think you'll find the answers there. So check it out, because that was the whole reason why I wrote the book. And, let me know what you think about it after you take a look. All right, that's going to do it for now. Thank y'all so much. God bless.